Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of the Hindu newspaper for the day and take a look at the articles which are relevant for your prelims or the mains examination, and also along with that taking up a couple of practice questions to look at how to create answers if a question from those particular areas appear in the exam. Now, at the end of the discussion, I also advise you to visit our Telegram page and do take a look at the multiple choice questions which can be framed from the topic and thereby enhance your prelims scoreability as well. But before we take a look into the topics for the day, a couple of important announcements. At 8 p.m. today, we will have a live UCAN session, and that is something which we will continue throughout the month. So for this week, as you can see, today we will have from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. the UCAN session, that is the current affairs for the past month and the past 15 days, shall be covered in significant detail, along with the multiple choice questions which can be framed, or the type of questions which can be framed from those particular topics. So today we are going to have a UCAN session for IR that will be taken by Chetan sir. Tomorrow, that is Tuesday, we'll have a UCAN session for environment ecology. Then on 6th, that is Wednesday, a UCAN session, all of them from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. So on Wednesday, social issues to be taken by Astha ma'am, and then on 9th, that is on Saturday, you will have a UCAN session for polity to be conducted by Sarmat sir. So do join us live, do participate in the discussion, and thereby enhance your current affairs aspect as well. Now, when we talk about current affairs, we are highly cognizant of the fact that many of the candidates, they face issue in terms of the current affairs associated with the places in news, the places for mapping purposes, etc. So keeping that in mind, we are going to come up with the 4th episode of Places in News, our bi-weekly initiative where we do come out with the places in news and the associated multiple choice question and previous year question from those particular areas to simplify your map pointing skill and ease up your burden before the prelims exam. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to cover today. So today in total, we are going to take a look at 10 different topics. Now, starting from the first topic, the BRICS summit boost to India-Iran ties. Now, how Indo-Iranian ties, they can have a significant potential but also are fraught with challenges. So that is something relevant for GS paper 2. Then, revenue repercussions. This is about the GST collections showing a kind of a variation from one month to another. In the month of October, it has shown an uptick, which is a much needed relief. But what can we gather from that GST data in terms of the monthly revenue being earned? So that is again a part of GS paper 3. Sharing of resources. This is about the problem that the fishermen face in the region of the Tamil Nadu coastline and the Sri Lankan coastline, and in the region particularly associated with Pork Bay. So what are the issues and what should be the way forward? So this is again going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. On the new coastal zone plan of Kerala. So the coastal zone management plan for the region of Kerala has received a nod of approval from the Union Ministry. So what is that coastal regulation zone and the CRZ norms associated, and what are the implications that Kerala can expect out of it? The positives, the negatives associated. Very favorable area for UPSC, so relevant for your GS paper 3. What are the major challenges faced by the Indian cities? So problems associated with urban settlements, particularly in India, and what are the way forward? This is relevant for your GS paper 1 as well as for your GS paper 3. Then, rejuvenating the millet market in rural India by tackling challenges. How to provide an uptick in the millet demand and what could be done as a strategic move in order to raise the demand, particularly in the rural regions, relevant for your GS paper 3. And then few of the articles, we are going to take a look at it briefly for the prelims perspective. For example, Aditya L1 missions experiment has proven to be successful. So with the help of that, we will take a look at what do we understand by coronal mass ejection. So like that, we are going to take a look at 10 different topics today, starting with the first topic, that is the BRICS summit boost to India-Iran ties. Now basically, Indo-Iranian ties have been going through a kind of a topsy-turvy path for the past few years. Till roughly around 5 to 7 years back, our ties with Iran were very, very vital and very vibrant. But then in the past few years, the ties have indicated or have experienced a kind of a downturn. That was followed by statements made by the supreme leader in Iran as well, Ayatollah, where he talked about the oppression in certain Indian areas and talked about the oppression that the minorities face, which riled up the Indian authorities and arguably justifiably so. But then, having said that, the recent BRICS meeting, which was held by and where you had a bilateral meet between our Prime Minister and the Iranian head of state as well, so President of the Republic of Iran. So both of them met, and that sowed the seed for the expectation of better ties going ahead. So very briefly and in a crisp manner, let us analyze what are the potential that Indo-Iranian ties hold. What are the positives which indicate that they can reach greater heights and areas of cooperation, and what are the challenges and the way forward as we move ahead for the Indo-Iranian ties. So that is how we will classify this topic, break this topic down and understand them in chunks and parts. So starting first of all with the potential that the Indo-Iranian ties hold. Now, when the Indian Prime Minister met with the Iranian President at that point of time, both sides appreciated each other's importance in the local geopolitical sphere. Now, while India's global clout is increasing by the day, that is, India's voice matters much more in the global committee of nations, and that influence is increasing. Iran sees it as a kind of a positive aspect, and that is what was expressed during the BRICS bilateral meet which was conducted in Russia recently. So, Iran views India's help, particularly in gaining membership of SCO, in gaining the membership of BRICS, as a positive contribution that India is making. So that is where, when we talk about the potential as of now, the unexplored potential as of now, so existing realities. What are the existing realities? So when we talk about the existing realities here, India's global role is increasing. And that is where Iran sees this as a positive in terms of the membership attained. Also, because India is at good terms with majority of the nations, and that is owing to our diplomatic depth and our diplomatic flexibility, India is also seen by various different sections in Iranian administration as an ideal mediator in global conflicts, be it the Russia-Ukraine war or be it the Israeli-Iranian conflict which is brewing up in the region of West Asia and which is a threat to peace in the region of West Asia. So that is where India is seen as negotiator and a kind of one of the conflict resolutors, so to say, mediators in the global conflict, right? So India as mediator in global conflicts. Then it is also a truth that Iran is particularly well endowed with natural resources, be it when we talk about fossil fuels. So, holding close to around 12% of the global reserves, Iran is a significant source of energy reserves. And that is something which is always going to be vital for an energy scarce country like India. We depend on imports for meeting our energy requirements, and Iran can be our net energy provider, which it was the case up till 2019, where almost double digit or more than around 10% of our imports of oil were coming from the region of Iran. Now that has declined in the past few years owing to the COVID pandemic and owing to also the harsh sanctions imposed by the Western countries and Western economies on Iran. So that is where even energy security or energy potential from Iran. So these are the existing realities. But when we talk about moving ahead, what are the areas of cooperation that India and Iran can find a common ground and work upon that? So that is something which is important for us to understand, because going ahead, that is how you plan for the diplomatic moves as well. So areas of cooperation moving ahead. So this can be divided under few brackets. So what are the areas of cooperation? So basically, first of all, the basic area of cooperation is that of infra and connectivity. As you might be aware that India is already having a significant amount of contribution in building and commissioning of the Chabahar port, ensuring that there is a connectivity to the region of Afghanistan from Chabahar port by the development of the Zaranj, the railway line, and also the road line linking to the western portion of Afghanistan. So that is where the connectivity and infrastructure building, and that is the path that India is looking at going ahead into the future as the vital connectivity route even to Central Asia. Because Central Asia, India is aware, China is aware, and even the globe and the world order is aware about the untapped potential in terms of trade and demand that Central Asia holds. Because Central Asia is landlocked, right? It doesn't have access to shipping lanes. Owing to that, much of the trade potential remains untapped, and India seeks to unlock that so that not only goods but also services can be traded, and that can bring prosperity to the region of Central Asia and also uplift Indian economy. And Iran can be a vital trade route and vital connectivity path in that entire plan. So that is where the first area of cooperation will be infra and connectivity. And this will boost the trade, integration, and coming together of the entire region as well. So here you can give the example of Chabahar port as connectivity to western portion of Afghanistan and also international north-south transportation corridor in order to provide connectivity to Central Asia. Then other than that, as we talked about, the energy potential that Iran holds is quite significant. And that is where, when we talk about the energy potential, there can be no two ways about the fact that India requires crude oil and natural gas as well. Iran has also, by the way, has been a major key component through the decades in order to fulfill our requirement for fertilizers also. It is only owing to the kind of pressure and the sanction that the Western nations have imposed that our import of fertilizers from the region of Iran has reduced. But if you take a look at it historically, urea, an important fertilizer being used by farmers across the various parts of the country, one of the major sources was Iran for a long period of time. So when we talk about energy, so here you can have the aspect of oil, imports, but also this oil import either by shipping lanes through the Chabahar port, or because you have to understand that Chabahar port in itself lies to the east of the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is the choke point, is a very narrow water body which connects the Persian Gulf along with the Gulf of Oman. Now that Persian Gulf is always conflict ridden. So there is always a possibility that the Strait of Hormuz can be blocked by any adversarial force, and as a consequence of that, oil imports and oil trade can be hampered in the long run. Now Chabahar port being to the east and in slightly closer to the open waters means Chabahar port can become a reliable transportation hub where it can be free from the global conflict zones. And that is where the oil imports can always be redirected to. So this is one of the areas where both the countries are looking to deepen their cooperation further. Other area is basically development of oil pipeline. Because you see, when you develop an oil pipeline, that is a reliable source of fuel supply and also very, very cheap because the transportation cost is almost put out of the window. And that pipeline is sought to be developed between Oman, Iran, and then India. Oman and Iran, as recently as in 2022, they have agreed to lay the foundation for deep sea underwater oil pipeline and also the development of refineries and tankage systems in the coastal areas of Oman and Iran. So connectivity from that area in the form of the pipeline from Oman or Iran into the region of India can virtually solve a lot of our energy scarcity. So here, even pipelines that are important. Then other than that, when we talk about the cooperation areas, you also have the cultural connectivity, that is true. But then when we talk about more tangible things in recent times, you have areas of cooperation such as terrorism. Now, both India and Iran, they are on the two sides of the terror hub of Pakistan. So cooperation, intelligence sharing can be developed so that both of them are able to contain the terrorism and the outbreak of terrorism which happens from the hub of Pakistan. So there also is a potential scope of lot of cooperation. And there is also a scope in terms of defense. Joint projects such as drone developments, etc., because Iran has been known to be supplying a lot of various equipments to Russia. Now, cooperation in defense terms with Iran is going to be problematic when the world sees it. So that is why we need to be very careful about the type of defense programs that we pick up, we choose to take up cooperation and coordination. Other than that, you can also have the aspect of culture and people-to-people connect. So these are the areas where we can cooperate, coordinate, and move ahead. But then we are faced with a lot of challenges as well. What are the challenges? So when you take a look at the challenges, they can also be listed in various terms. First of all, Iran lies in a conflict-prone zone. So when we talk about any kind of trade relations being developed, be it with Iran, be it with any other country in the region of West Asia. For example, even when we talk about the India-Middle East corridor, the transportation corridor and the trade corridor which was mooted to be developed owing to the outcome of the G20 summit, that also is in limbo because of the fact that the entire zone is perpetually in some or the other conflict. And whenever the region is embroiled in conflict, then all the trade partners get impacted. This is where India's policy has to be so resilient. Like China, we can take a leaf out of China's playbook in this case, where when we see China has been seen or has projected itself as one of the principal negotiators and mediators between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both of them are opposing factions in the region. Both of them are principally opposed to each other's ideology. But still, China has found a middle ground to bring them both on the negotiating table. So that is something that India can also seek to do, benefiting the relation or increasing the relation with each of the countries independently. And this will happen how? By dehyphenation of the relationship. What do we mean by dehyphenation? For example, Earlier, if you take a look at it, whenever any global leader would visit India, they would accompany it with a visit to Pakistan also, because they would refer to Indo-Pak as one region. But now if you take a look at it, Indian visit is considered to be very separate as compared to the global leaders when they approach Pakistan. So that is de-hyphenation from the Indo-Pak principle. So that is a way forward in this case. That is de-hyphenation, hyphenating the relationship. Then the other challenge which is there. The second challenge is the fact that there are crippling sanctions which have been imposed on Iranian authorities and the Iranian regime for a long period of time by the Western forces. And that happened ever since Donald Trump, the president of US, he took office and he took charge in 2016. Ever since that point of time, there have been a lot of sanctions, and even on the organizations which carry out trade relationship with Iran. So navigating through those sanctions would require a lot of bilateral cooperation, having currency swap agreements, trading in local currencies, and so on. So that is where the threat of sanctions is something that needs to be negotiated. Then after that, statements, incendiary statements which are made. For example, the Ayatollah made a statement about the minorities being oppressed in India, and that was seen by India as a direct intervention and interference in its sovereign matters. And that is something which is not appreciated by Indians at large, and neither is it appreciated by the administration of the day. So that is where both the countries have to ensure that the political statements and the riling up of political sentiments, that is kept in check. And then also, another challenge in terms of the fact is that there is a slowdown in terms of economic growth in Iran. So that means India's requirements will not adequately be fulfilled by Iran. So that is where we have to navigate properly. Energy security, transportation security, connectivity, infrastructure, people-to-people connect are the areas that we have to exploit, and we have to look at the long-term vision of development of the region. Okay, so with the help of this article, what is it that we have looked at? The existing potential ties and the potential of the ties between India and Iran. What are the areas, possible areas of cooperation that both the countries can exploit and utilize? What are the challenges that are faced in the region? And what are the way forward going ahead? Okay, more than sufficient for the type of question which can be framed from this. Let us take a look at that with the help of the practice question. India-Iran ties hold the potential to unlock huge gains for both sides, but are dotted with challenges. Elucidate. So here, this is a kind of a detailed answer which is required. So what do you write in the intro? Do you straight away talk about the benefits and the challenges? No. In the intro, you talk about the fact that Indo-Iranian ties go back centuries, and they are historical, cultural, and local. From the historical cultural aspect, they vary to energy and economic utilities. That will be your intro. A brief about Indo-Iranian ties. Then in the body part, you talk about the fact that in the past few years, the ties have had a rocky upstart and a rocky existence owing to certain challenges. However, there are multiple different areas where there can be cooperation, and a lot of potential lies to be unlocked. So there you talk about the areas of cooperation, again in a point sub-paragraph manner. Then after that, you talk about the challenges that it poses. What are the challenges that both the countries face? Then, in the conclusion, you talk about the fact that going ahead into the future, India needs to diversify its energy imports and also ensure that its diplomacy is non-aligned, looking at the national interest first. And in the context of that, Indo-Iranian ties hold particular significance not only for India's position in Southeast Asia, but also India's stake in the region of West Asia. So that is where you can conclude the answer and fetch good marks. Okay? Now, then moving on to the second article. That is about revenue repercussions. Now, this is an article which talks about the GST collections. Now, GST collections, that is, GST is a consumption-based tax. So, whenever you have GST collection data which comes over, that gives you an idea about the consumption pattern in the economy. Whenever the consumption or the amount of consumption increases, that is good news for the economic growth and the economic realities, which means people are consuming more. That means there will be a greater demand created. That means there will be greater economic production and increased GDP action. So that is why GST data and the GST collection data, that is being looked at very carefully and very keenly by the various economists across the world, investors across the world, etc. Now, this year's GST collection has indicated a kind of a variation. Now, while the amount of collection in the month of April, that was humongous, and that crossed the magical figure of 2 lakh crores. But that was owing to the fact that last month of the GST figures of April will indicate the collections which happened in the month of March. So being the last month in the financial year, there are a lot of compensations which have to go out, a lot of eventual write-ups which have to happen. So that is why the collections are more. The demand has to be properly consumed, so on. But after that high which was in terms of GST collections which was reached and attained in April, the GST collection indicated a decline, which was worrisome. For example, the amount of GST collection which was indicated for the month of June, for the month of September, August, all of that indicated a significant decline. Right? So here, let us take a look at it with the help of the graph, with the help of the data. So here, this is a data released by the Finance Ministry. Now here you will see 3 coloration patterns. First indicates the GST collection in the financial year 22-23. Then this teal color represents the financial year 23-24 and orange color represents the amount of collection, GST collection in this year. So observe that in the month of April, it reached a peak, very high amount of collection. Then again, it started falling. In the month of May, it dipped. In the month of June, again, it dipped. Now, mind you, that this always has indicated a growth as compared to the past years. But it is the amount of growth that we are concerned with. Why? Because if the growth rate, right, if the growth rate is not that high as compared to last year, while the population is increasing, if the growth rate is not high, means the amount of consumption is nearing a stagnation. And that can never be good for an economic parameter, because when the consumption does not increase, the economic activity or productivity will also lie stagnant. So again, in the month of July, if you observe, in the month of August, September, you observe that the growth was very muted. In the month of October, again, that growth has come back. So that is a good sign that in the month of October, by the way, the data that you see for October here, that indicates the amount of collections which would have happened in the previous month, that is for the month of September. Now, this indicates, or there are certain things that we can extract out of it. Remembering the data pointers here is futile, not required. So what are the extracts that we can derive from this particular chart, from the topic itself? First of all, it indicates that there is a rising demand because there is increased consumption of goods which is happening in the economy. And as the article indicates, that in the month of September, there, due to some of the conditions, for the 15 days, that is the second half of the month, there was not much of a consumption pattern, and that is owing to the fact that in the month of September, that consumption pattern was broken due to the festive condition, the festive season, right? So thereby this amount of increase in revenue has been indicated only based upon the consumption in the first half of September. You had the Pitru Dasha, due to which the consumption generally reduces. People don't buy new things. So this is supposed to go up, expected to go up further in the month of October and November, when the peak festive season comes into play. So that is good news for the economic productivity. There is also vital indications that we are going through a kind of a K-shaped growth. And this is indicated by the parameter of car sales. For example, the high valued or the pricey SUVs. Now those cars, the outtake of those cars or the number of people buying those cars, that is indicating a tremendous growth. Whereas the mid-range car segments, they are not indicating that much growth. They are indicating almost a kind of a stagnant demand, which tells you that the demand for pricier goods is increasing, which means what? There can be increasing inequalities in the segment. That well-off people, the number of well-off people, that is increasing, whereas the middle class, that is getting vacant. Then year-on-year growth is comparatively less. If you compare the amount of GST revenue collections which happened up till the month of August, September last year, and if you compare the amount of GST collections which have happened this year, it has hardly indicated much of a growth, which again is a worrisome fact. This on the light of the fact that recently the FMCG sector, that is the fast-moving consumer goods like your shampoo, soaps, etc. So the FMCG sector had indicated that demand is reducing in Indian market because people are not buying the soap, shampoos, etc. And that means the amount of money that they have in the pockets, that is reducing. So this GST collection revenue also validates that particular fact, which requires the urgent attention for income increasing activities in the rural areas. Then not much impact on deficit. While there is a lot of expectation that in the month of October and November, the GST revenue has to kick up, has to increase. But then overall, the direct tax collections have indicated a robust growth. So that is why the tax targets that the government has set, that will be fulfilled, that will be maintained, right? So there is not that much pressure in terms of the tax buoyancy, in terms of the revenue collected, but still an increase in GST revenue will ease the pressure on the governments at the state level, at the central level, and enable them to implement the required reforms, welfare schemes, capital expansion, etc. So that is basically the outtake that you can have. So what are the brief gist of the topic? GST collections after April have indicated a rise again. The growth rate has indicated a rise again as compared to the previous year. And that is owing to the festive season, given the fact that in the month of September, only first half consumption happened. Second half, due to Pitru Dasha, you did not have that much consumption, but still the growth has increased, which means there is demand in the economy. It is expected to increase further in the months of October, November. Then what does this indicate? It indicates increased consumption. It indicates that there is a K-shaped growth. That means unequal growth, and also indicates that overall the tax collection target will be maintained. Then it also ends up indicating that what can be done going ahead in the future. So when the GST Council is going to meet again, so it will have its agenda set in front of it, rationalization of rates of few of the products, for example, cement sector, etc. That is going to have a significant amount of benefit in terms of the demand for cement, and cement is required for the construction sector, and construction is one of the largest employment generators. So that these kind of measures can indicate an uptick in the rural demand, which is very much required going ahead. Okay. Now, moving on to the third article, and the third article or the next article talks about sharing resources. So what is this article about? So basically, there was recently conducted 6th meeting of India-Sri Lanka Joint Working Group on Fisheries. Now, India-Sri Lanka Joint Working Group on Fisheries, the conceptualization of this was done in order to iron out the differences and disputes which emerge between the fishermen in India and that of the northern provinces in Sri Lanka, and there are frequent allegations against each other, and there is a lot of difference of opinion, lot of Indian fishermen being incarcerated or jailed, the fishing vessels being seized. So there is a kind of a brewing difference between them. So that is why, in order to resolve and iron out these differences, this working group keeps on meeting. Now, in the recent working group meet, again, the aspect was, or the main agenda that India put forward was the need to have dialogue, resumption of dialogue with the fishermen between India and Sri Lanka. That is something which has been highlighted by the Foreign Affairs Minister as well, and has been basically also one of the key agenda and talking points whenever you had a Sri Lankan president going for a bilateral visit. So here, very briefly, this entire issue has been brewing up in the region of Pork Bay. So here, if you take a look at this particular image, now here you will see that you have the Indian coastline and the Sri Lankan coastline, and this is your international maritime boundary. Now, this international maritime boundary basically demarcates the areas under the control, or whereby you can have the region under Indian control and the region under Sri Lankan control. Now, what are the issues which prevail? One of the issue which prevails is what the Sri Lankan fishermen, they always keep on alleging, is the fact that the Indian fishermen, they particularly and very frequently, they are alleged to be transgressing that international maritime boundary, entering into Sri Lankan waters and carrying out fishing activities. And that is what is leading to the seizing of the boats, and large amount of penalties, and repeat offenders are also incarcerated or jailed. So that is the major issue. That is the issue of transgression by the fishermen. Now, another point of concern and a sticking point has been, Sri Lankan fishermen always allege that the fishermen coming from Tamil Nadu, they indulge in practices like bottom trawling. Now, what is this bottom trawling? So this is a kind of an unsustainable fishing activity whereby you attach a large net to the end of the boat, and that net ends up scraping through the sea floor in order to catch any kind of fish which is even there at the bottom, hidden at the sea floor. Now, what it does, it completely uproots and destroys the marine ecology. The plants, underwater plants are uprooted, the underwater corals are uprooted, there is a lot of modification of the water which happens, and that region ends up becoming almost a dead zone for a long period of time. So that is why that impacts the amount of fish catch that you can expect from the area in the coming years as well. So that is another kind of an allegation which is imposed on the Tamil Nadu fishermen. Then another issue is lack of clarity in terms of the boundary region. Clarity in boundary areas. So oftentimes the fishermen, they basically feign ignorance. They say that they are not aware of what the international line has been, and they oftentimes end up crossing that. And that is again what leads to incarceration, and when someone is jailed from one side or the other, oftentimes bad blood boils over. Then there is always the issue of overexploitation of resources in the region, which the Sri Lankan fishermen allege that the Tamil Nadu fishermen, they come in large numbers and they end up carrying out overfishing, which leaves very little amount for them. So that is overexploitation, or overfishing. Now, this is the problem which the region faces, due to which there is a lot of controversy. So, what is the way forward? What should be done going ahead? So, the way forward has to be very simple. First of all, when we talk about the way forward, one has to be, and the first step is more dialogue. Dialogue between the fishermen in the northern provinces and the fishermen in Tamil Nadu. The organizations, the leaders there, they can always interact with each other and end up ironing out the kind of gaps that are present. Then there has to be an encouragement and revitalization of the deep sea fishing program that India sought to encourage the fishermen in Tamil Nadu region to carry out. Because you see, bottom trawling is a fishing practice which has been banned almost across the world. Wherever bottom trawling is carried out, that means a decline in the marine ecology in that region. So India is encouraging the fishermen of the region that go for deep sea fishing, where you can have a varied amount of catch also, and there you can have increased income and you won't end up hurting the marine ecosystem. So that is why one needs to further augment that program. And how do you do that? By providing them with the modern equipments, by providing or enabling them with modern technology, etc. So that is where deep sea fishing has to be encouraged. Then, this is also something, or the region of, or the dispute between the fishermen, as we talked about in the case of India-Iran. This is also a victim of political riling by the political leaders on both sides of the border, be it at the time of the assembly elections in Sri Lanka or at the time of elections in Tamil Nadu. Oftentimes, the sentiments are flared up. So that is again where we have to simmer down the sentiments so that sane voices prevail. And that is where the dialogue channels need to be opened up. While the article also argues that there needs to be, the government of India or New Delhi needs to be planning some welfareist measures for fishermen of northern provinces. But we have to understand that these welfareist measures for the fishermen in northern provinces, that has to be coupled with the developmental assistance that India is carrying out in Sri Lanka. India already is carrying out developmental assistance in Sri Lanka with the development of townships, infrastructure, etc., worth billions of dollars, along with the financial assistance. So that is where the welfareist approach needs to be redirected to the northern fishermen as well, so that the public sentiment in terms of the northern provinces, where still a lot of people are still suffering owing to the outcomes of the civil war, the very violent civil war which happened in Sri Lanka. So that is where they want some assistance, some financial, some kind of tangible assistance to be seen to be coming from New Delhi, so that can also provide some goodwill. So assistance, developmental works, mental works. There is also a need for the development of transparent mechanism in terms of monitoring the boats which have actually crossed the border and the judicial process which follows. Okay, so this is something which can be extracted as a way forward. Okay, now moving on to the next article. Sandhyalata, year-on-year growth. Year-on-year growth, Y-on-Y growth basically means year-on-year growth. So basically, when we talk about, let's suppose the amount of GST collection which happened in 2022, what is the GST collection which happened in 2023? Let's suppose that indicated a growth rate of 8%, right? Now, if 2023 to 2024, again there is a growth rate of, let's suppose, 9%, 10%. That means it is good. Consumption is increasing higher as compared to the rate of inflation. But let's suppose 22 to 23, there was a growth rate of 8%. 23 to 24, that growth rate is only 5%, which means the amount of growth which is happening, that is declining, which is an area of concern. Okay? I hope that is understood. Kunal, most worst part is way forward because are reducing with other countries in a proper way. Everyone can say because either Prime Minister, bureaucrats are reducing problems. Right. So, Kachativu. So Kachativu, we have done a detailed video regarding Kachativu. You can refer to that because that would require a detailed analysis. That is a part of the agreement. Deep sea fishing is difficult because of traditional machinery. Yes, Pranay, it is difficult, but that is where majority of the countries which have benefited from fisheries, be it the countries across the Mediterranean coastline, be it the countries of North America, be it the countries of East Asia, all of them beyond a point, if they are able to increase their level of income, that is only by carrying out deep sea fishing, because that is when the amount of fish catch, the diversity of catch will increase significantly. Manoj, yesterday's question, UN can't do anything about China's debt trap on other countries through BRI. No, because when we talk about BRI, that is not a kind of a UN initiative. It is a bilateral agreement that China enters with various different countries, and it is tailor-made for various different countries. So that is why UN intervention is not at all possible. Okay? I hope the problems are solved. Right? Now, the next article on the new coastal zone plan for Kerala. So this is basically the fact that Union Ministry for Environment, Forest and Climate Change has approved the coastal zone management plan for 10 coastal districts in Kerala. Now, this is as per the Coastal Regulation Zone Notification or CRZ notification of 2019. So, the Coastal Zone Management Plan. What is the Coastal Zone Management Plan? So, the coastal regulation or the type of construction that you can carry out in the coastal areas, that is something that gained prevalence in India since the early 1990s. Now, this was being done under the aegis of Environmental Protection Act 1986. Now, the CRZ norms, they were issued quite frequently. So the major CRZ norms were issued in 2011. But before that, the coastal regulation zone meant that you cannot carry out any kind of construction or any kind of developmental activity in the coastal area, because coastal area is a very pristine ecosystem. Coastal area represents what is also referred to as an ecotone, which means it is a transition between two different types of ecosystems. You have the terrestrial ecosystem and you have the marine ecosystem. So the coastal area is a unique habitat for many different kinds of species. So it has to be tackled carefully. Now, these CRZ norms were then again notified and changed in 2018 and 19, and you had a new notification issued. Now, the management plan or the developmental plan in the coastal areas, they have to adhere to these kind of norms and limitations. So, the CRZ norms, what they are, that is vital for your examination. Now, here you will see that the coastal zone is divided into various different subgroupings. You have CRZ1, CRZ1A, CRZ2, CRZ3A, 3B, depending upon the population that you have, CRZ4, which is in the water body and also in the rivers, creeks, etc., the backwaters. So everywhere there's a kind of a regulation in terms of what can be constructed, what cannot be constructed. So for example, if you take a look at CRZ1A, this is ecologically sensitive area. If you take a look at CRZ1B, intertidal zone, the region between the high tide and the low tide, so no construction is allowed, ecologically very sensitive area. Then CRZ2 contains of small habitations. CRZ3 has been classified or divided into 3A and 3B based upon the population. So CRZ3A, where the population density is more than 2161 people per square kilometer as per the 2011 census, and CRZ3B, where the population is slightly lesser. Now, from the high tide line, you will see that there is a 50-meter region which is demarcated as a no development zone. And in CRZ3A areas, that means, to simplify it, declutter it all, areas closer to the coastline which have a higher population pressure, in those areas up till 50 meters from the high tide line, no development can happen. In areas where the population is still comparatively lesser, up till 200 meters, no development can happen, no construction can happen. You see, as per the 2011 norms, this was uniform across all the coastal areas for almost 200 meters. But in the populated areas, that is what has been classified as CRZ3B, that has been reduced to 50 meters. So these new norms will now be implemented in the region of Kerala. So what are the expected impacts when the new norms are going to be implemented? So first of all, let us take a look at the positive impacts. So positive impact, the first one being that, you see, owing to the lack of transparent coastal regulation zone norms, any kind of construction activity in the coastal area would be prohibited, because those regions would be covered under the previous norms where the no development zone was to extend up till 200 meters from high tide line. Which means what? That many of the habitations there, neither roads could be constructed, neither infrastructure could be constructed, buildings could not be constructed. So the population pressure that Kerala faces, Kerala has got one of the highest dense, or is one of the most densely populated states. You have many districts in the coastal area, all of them facing inhibitions in terms of construction. So that is where many regions in Kerala lack the required infrastructure development to absorb the population pressure. With the amount or acceptance of the new norms, or with the provision of the new norms, there will be better infrastructure construction and ease of living for the large population. So that will be, there will be infra development, right, and vital to absorb large population pressure. Absorb population pressure. Okay. So this is the positive. But what is the negative? This also means that when you talk about Kerala, Kerala is considered to be a land of backwaters and mangroves. Those critical ecosystems can get destroyed. Those critical ecosystems can get damaged. So that is a major threat to the ecosystem. So when we talk about negatives, here, mangroves and backwaters can get damaged, right? And this can also be exploited in many of the other districts as well. So there will be a long-term damage. Okay. So here, out of this article, very simply, what is it that you have to extract? What are the CRZ norms? What is CRZ 1A? What is 1B? What is 2? What is 3A, 3B, 4A, 4B, and also what is the concept of no development zone. So in areas of high population pressure up till 50 meters from high tide line, no development zone, nothing can be developed. In areas of slightly lower population pressure, 200 meters from the high tide line, there you don't have to develop anything. With the development or with the acceptance and coming of the new norms, the amount of no development zone in Kerala will almost reduce by half. Earlier, you had more than 200 square kilometer of the coastal area of Kerala, which was a no development zone. Now that will be reduced to 108 square kilometers roundabout. That tells you there will be greater area for utilization. That will ease the population pressure, because eastern part of Kerala is dotted with mountains. So there the population is not very high. It is in the Malabar plains and the coastline where all the population is densely situated. So it will solve a lot of urban issues in the region of Kerala, but at the same time, it will put the critical ecosystem at risk. Okay? Now, after this, we move on to the practice question. Coastal regulation is an important component of preserving critical ecosystem. Analyze the above statement highlighting the advantages and lacunae of CRZ norms. So here, you have to go for the analysis of the CRZ norms. So what do you do, or what do you write in the intro? In the introduction, you talk about the critical ecosystem. So coastal ecosystems, they are considered to be ecotones, and they support very vital habitats and form a kind of a perfect shelter for varying kind of marine as well as terrestrial species, including turtles, mangroves, etc., and also a perfect breeding ground for many fishes. That will be your intro. So in the intro, you talk about the benefit of the coastal ecosystem. Then after that, in the body, you start talking about the fact that the CRZ norms, what is their purpose? To regulate the construction and the developmental activities in the coastal areas in order to ensure there is not much over exploitation which is happening. That is what you narrate and talk about in the body. And then you talk about that how these CRZ norms, they are very beneficial as well, because they ensure vital developmental works are carried out. But at the same time, so you talk about the benefit, infrastructure development, settlement requirements, easing the population pressure, all of that you talk about. Then challenges, you mention about the fact that much area will be exploited, critical backwaters, mangrove regions, such ecosystems can be lost, are in threat, etc. And in the conclusion, there is a need for a holistic plan for the coastal area, for the conservation of the coastal area, if we want to adhere to the conservation of biodiversity in the region. Like that, you can conclude the answer. Now, moving on to the next article. What are the major challenges faced by Indian cities? Now, this is a kind of an article which keeps on getting repeated time and time again. But then it again talks about the issues associated with urban development in our country. So broadly, when we talk about the urbanization is something which is a phenomena across the entirety of the world for the past 150 years almost. But urbanization across the developed part of the world and urbanization across developing part of the world both have very different issues. When we talk about the urban development across the world, now there you have certain issues which are present. One is poverty, then you have inequality, then you have various types of pollution. Air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, noise pollution. So that is environmental degradation. Mental degradation. Now basically, all these three major issues, they get exaggerated in the global cities with the aspect of climate change. Whenever there is climate change, the amount of poverty increases. For example, in any urban center, if you consider the region of the floodplains, etc., then owing to climate change, there can be flooding, there can be dry conditions. It is a poor population and those settlement areas which will always suffer. So all of this is exaggerated by the aspects such as climate change. But you have to understand that urbanization in developed areas and urbanization in developing countries both follow different principles. For example, the development of urban centers in the developed part of the world, for example, Western countries, that happened on the base and the back of colonialism. When we talk about the development of cities and urban areas in Britain, for example, that was owing to the large amount of wealth extracted from colonies like India. That has led to the development. So that is a kind of a wealth-based development that the various different Western cities have indicated. But urbanization in India, urbanization in developing world, that is a poverty-driven urbanization. Means what? People flock to the urban areas in search of work, in search of economic opportunities. And that is poverty driven. Because you are poor, you want, in most of the cases, you want better job opportunities. That is why we move into the urban areas. So that in itself means there will be issues like lack of affordable housing, people settling down in the outskirts, etc. So if we take a look at urbanization in India, the principle which is followed is poverty-driven urbanization. So what are the problems which are faced? First of all, inadequate spatial planning. Which are the residential areas? Which are the working areas, administrative areas? That is not planned. Even if the planning is done, it is outdated. Even when new infrastructure is built, so it is built keeping the next elections in time. By the time they get completed, already the demand has outpaced the supply of infrastructure, which various urban areas like Bangalore, etc., they are facing. It is the face of abject infrastructure failure. So as a consequence of that, what happens? Marginalization of the poor population. They are forced to live in very outskirts of the urban areas. So there is also the impact of climate change, which is putting a lot of strain on urban resources, be it groundwater availability, be it energy availability, all of that. There is a massive migration that urban areas have to support, and this is particularly because the number of urban areas in our country, they are absolutely limited. We are talking about larger metropolitan or megapolis cities. So that is why these are for example, Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and to some extent even Chennai. So these are only the major centers which are left over with the work or the job of absorbing large amount of migrants, which always they turn out to be inadequate. So that is why you need more development of novel cities, more new cities to come up. Inequality and social segregation happens. You have, as I told you, lack of affordable housing means the poorer population is pushed to the sidelines or the margins of the urban settlement, and that brings with itself limitations in terms of governance, maintaining law and order, ensuring that crime doesn't happen, ensuring proper availability of welfare measures, all of that becomes problematic. So due to which, on the basis of human capital, it is the population which is marginalized, which is vulnerable, particularly the older people, the weaker or various, when we talk about the population of different backgrounds, all of them, they suffer, the vulnerable population. Then when we talk about the women population, all of them, they also suffer greatly. What needs to be done? Despite the fact that you have the reforms with the help of the 74th Amendment, enough empowering of the local government has not been done. And that is where you need more financial power, more accountability and transparency in terms of the funds allocated to the local government and where it is used. Urban governance in our country is absolutely crumbled. It is seen to be a kind of a prestige battle in between the political parties. So that is where we need to have the urban governance much more transparent. At least when we take a look at China, for example, there the urban cities have grown. Why? That is because in those areas, the urban local government, they are given a large proportion of the funds. Whereas in our country, the urban governments, or when we talk about the municipalities, they don't have that much amount of funds. Whatever little amount of funds, that is consumed by the political commitments itself. So there is not much fund for development. So that is where the local population needs to be made aware that this comes under the purview of the urban government and the local government. If they are unable to fulfill that, who has to be held accountable? So that is when there will be better outcomes driven out of it as well. Okay. Now, about urban governance problems, that is again one of the favorable areas of UPSC. It has repeated questions associated with that very frequently, particularly in GS paper 1. Now, then rejuvenating the millet market in rural India by tackling challenges. So, this article talks about the fact that despite the fact that there has been so much amount of stress on millet production and consumption across the country, and India has highlighted the utility of millet across the entirety of the world, still the demand and the outtake of millet in the rural countryside is not that high as the potential holds. So here, despite the fact that there is not much amount of demand, or the consumption is not very high, the situation is not that bad. It is not as if millet is a food only of the urban areas. Millet consumption is happening in the rural areas, but there can be a lot of things which can be done to increase the millet consumption in the rural areas. So what are the way forward or things to be done to increase the demand? One of the factors can always be a change in the cropping pattern. So crop diversification is very much required, because many parts of our country, there is a kind of either a monoculture where only one single type of crop is grown, or the rice wheat cycle. Owing to that, the soil is also becoming infertile. There is a greater salinity of soil which is happening due to over irrigation, over application of fertilizer. Land degradation is happening. So when you diversify the crop, you start growing millets. That is when the consumption will automatically increase in the rural countryside, where people end up carrying out sustenance-based agriculture, whereby, let's suppose, whatever they are growing, much of that is consumed locally. So that is one of the measures. The other is tackling the price point. For example, when we talk about the price at which the products, various different millet products are available. So in the rural countryside, if that price point is kept at a lower threshold, at a lower bracket, there will be much more people who will be interested in that as compared to the higher price point which attracts the urban consumers. So that is where a rationalization of the price point, along with that, product diversification, different types of product, right? For example, if we take a look at the policies in Karnataka, now ragi is one of the major millets consumed in Karnataka, but there are multiple products of ragi which is available, which makes it more appealing and more consumable to the rural consumers as well. So product diversification is an important part. Other than that, developing forward and backward linkages with the market. So a supplier, let's suppose from Karnataka, should be able to easily sell his millet, let's suppose in Bihar, let's suppose in Bengal, Odisha, etc. What that will ensure is not only a favorable amount of price realization by the farmers, but also a cheaper rate at which the consumers in far off places can buy it. Because the farm to table inflation of crops in our country is amongst the highest in the world. That is, the amount of money that the middlemen make is simply surprising. So that is where you need a kind of a unified market, right? And for that you need access. Then utilization of millet in more public distribution schemes. Okay, so more public distribution schemes. So that is also required. For example, Odisha. Odisha has been supplying millets in the public distribution schemes under which various governments, they only supply wheat and rice. Odisha has been supplying millets. What that will ensure that the local population have a dietary habit of millets. This will also serve multiple purposes. India is a country which has attained food security but is seeking to attain nutritional security will benefit immensely out of this. So these are the things which can be done to increase the demand of the millets, consumption of millets in the rural areas. Okay? Now coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims. Starting with the first article, that is the first Asian Buddhist Summit in New Delhi will be conducted from tomorrow. This is a part of India's ongoing strategy of Act East and improving its relationship with the East Asian nations. So that is where in New Delhi, the Asian Buddhist Summit with the theme Role of Buddha Dhamma in Strengthening Asia. Because Buddhism and the tenets of Buddhism is something which is a common factor across many countries of East Asia. So this is seen to be a kind of a bolstering act for cultural connectivity in the portion of East Asia and improving the relations with the East Asia. Okay? Okay, I have some of the questions. Instead of increasing CRZ measures, we can do related to our existing norms. So yes, that is something. What can be done is, wherever CRZ norms are being implemented, proper feedback mechanism needs to be taken immediately to understand where the ecosystem is being damaged, where there is a problem, so that case by case basis, the CRZ norms can be tweaked. Migration basically is where you have movement of people on a permanent or a semi-permanent basis for geographical factors, ecological factors, environmental factors, economic factors, cultural factors, where you have rural to rural movement of people, rural to urban, urban to rural, etc. Infrastructure, transportation infrastructure can reduce the load on cities. Absolutely, yes. So that can also lead to the development of satellite towns. Pranay, when question related to urbanization, we will link to polity like 74th Amendment. Not only that, you have to talk about that despite the implementation of the 74th Amendment, you still have lack of enough powers, executive powers, lack of proper revenue generating mechanism, and lack of enough resources to the urban local bodies. That is what you have to highlight. One question, post harvesting cost for millets is high. So when you go for post harvesting cost, let's suppose you go for product diversification, value addition, that will be high, right? Otherwise, if you simply distribute the grains, that is not a very high cost enduring process. How to increase the demand of consumption? More awareness, diversification of the products, better price points, better availability, all of that can be done. Okay? Now, first science result from Aditya L1, ISRO's Sun mission, is out. So basically, the ISRO L1 mission, this India's solar mission, which was supposed to carry out scientific experiments and has been carrying out scientific experiments. Now it carried various different payloads to carry out that experiment. So one of the payloads is visible emission line coronagraph, which talks about or which measures the movement of plasma charged particles which are emitted from the sun. And it talks about, and it also carries out the research for coronal mass ejection. So that is where it has successfully predicted the coronal mass ejection which happened in the month of June or in the month of July. 16th of July, there was a vital coronal mass ejection which this payload was able to catch. So what is this coronal mass ejection? As you can see from a set of this animation and the image, oftentimes owing to issues or magnetic discrepancy, lot of charged particles are emitted, or plasma is emitted from the sun in large quantity. So here you can imagine the amount of charged particles emitted. If you take a look at this small tiny body in the image, that is the size of the earth. So just for scale parameters. So that is where you can see that there is huge amount of mass which is ejected, and that is indicated by the various satellite images also. Look at the speed at which it is emitted. So these are charged particles, and that is why it needs to be studied is basically it has got the potential to damage our satellite systems, our communication systems, our power grids, vital equipments, and so on. So studying the behavior, the magnetic anomalies that the charged particles or CMEs indicate is an important scientific endeavor across the planet. Aditya L1 mission has solved that problem successfully. So, and more such experiments are about to follow. So what is CME? Large expulsions of plasma and magnetic field from sun's corona. They can eject billions of tons of coronal material and carry an embedded magnetic field within the particles, and that can impact the Earth's own magnetosphere as well, which can in turn damage the various power plant projects, the various different power equipments, communication satellites, etc. Now they travel outwards of sun at a very high speed. They can reach planet Earth in around 15 to 18 hours itself. Sometimes the slow travel also happens, but mostly between 15 to 18 hours, they are able to reach the planet Earth. And as they are expelled from the sun, the size keeps on increasing. Oftentimes, this increase in size that you are able to see with the help of the animation, that happens to such an extent that it occupies almost a quarter of the space between the Earth and the sun. So that can also be very damaging. So here, what do you have to extract? Aditya L1 mission, which vital payload has carried out this particular experiment about coronal mass ejection, calculating the movement of plasma, and what is coronal mass ejection. Then, joint Russia-Sea drills signal start of Indonesian foreign policy shift. So when we talk about the foreign policy of Indonesia under the new president has made it absolutely clear it wants to increase its global say and also wants to increase the kind of political deepening of ties with Russia, despite the fact that there are Western sanctions. So that is why Indonesia has initiated a kind of a naval drill exercise to the east or in the region of the Java Sea, where Russian carriers, Corvette-class carriers, are going to carry out military exercises. This will also indicate a kind of a non-alignment and a kind of a neutral stance by another major nation, that is Indonesia. And that is where Indonesia is seeking to deepen the defense relations with Russia, which can be a lifeline for the already struggling defense industry in Russia as well. Okay. Then what we can extract from Buddhist Summit, what is the theme? And it is going to increase, or it is as per the policy of Act East policy of India. So there can be a multiple statement question which can be framed from that. So that is what you have to prepare for. Due to frequent solar ejections, more frequent northern and southern lights, yes. Coronal basically, Yadya refers to the fact that when we talk about the layers of the sun, you have the layer which is the corona, part of the photosphere itself. So that is where the charged particles oftentimes they are emitted owing to a kind of magnetic anomaly which develops. And that is large mass of particles ejected from the layer of corona of the sun, coronal mass ejection. Okay. Now the last article of the day, amid plans to upgrade Sukhoi 30 jets, Indian Air Force focusing on AI-based solution. So while the Indian Air Force is on its way to upgrade the inventory of Sukhoi jets, Sukhoi 30 jets that it has, more than around 250 Sukhoi jets that we have. So those jets are supposed to serve the Indian Air Force up till around 2055. So a lot of these jets require upgradation, maintenance, etc. Now, while that is happening and the government has given the in-principle approval to upgrade around 84 of the Sukhoi 30 jets, the Indian Air Force is looking at artificial intelligence-based solution in terms of carrying out the maintenance, repair and operations work. Basically, when it comes to replacement of equipments, the newer equipments put in place, etc. So for all of that, it is looking at AI-based solutions. So this is vital because it indicates the utility of AI for defense purposes. That is a question oftentimes asked, that in which areas AI can be used. So for logistics, it can be used for management of spares. It can be used for understanding which aircraft part requires replacement, which aircraft part requires refurbishment. For that also, it is required. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. We have covered all the various different topics. I hope that you have understood them in detail, and I hope the understanding has been comprehensive. Try to write the answers of the questions. Take a look at the multiple choice questions on the Telegram page, and then do join us at 6 p.m. to cover another episode of the various different places which have been in news for some reason or the other for the past 15 days and enhance your current affairs preparation. That will be all from my side. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.